For 50 years, Paul McCartney kept quiet, letting Yoko Ono take the blame and making people accept a story that wasn't quite telling the truth. He finally opened up now that he's 83 years old. Were you guys writing against each other for fun? Did you say nice things to each other? John and I? Yes, we were competitive. We didn't say it out loud, but in the end, we said, yeah, I see. Paul wrote a good one there. I should go. I would do the same thing. That's pretty good, right? No one expected the truth he's telling to be so complicated, painful, and emotional. It's not just about Yoko. It's about the deeper problems, human struggles, and tensions that caused the Beatles to break up in the end. We've learned something new that changes everything we thought we knew. There are cracks in the Beatlemania. They were the most famous band in the world in the early 1960s. Their fame grew overnight, with screaming fans, non-stop trips, and media attention all the time. Something was changing behind the happy faces and catchy songs, though. Being world famous put a lot of stress on them, and they gave up quickly. They were having a dream, but it cost a lot. In 1966, the band was tired of going on tour. There was too much noise, too many people, and too much chaos during the shows. They chose to stop going on tour and only work in the studio from now on. It didn't bring them closer, though. Instead, it pushed them into long hours, creative differences, and personal space. The energy between them changed when they were locked in studios with no one to watch and too much power. There was more to the Beatles than just song. They were a business, a brand, and a sign. With that success came new rules, new bosses, and more ideas from outside the company. They had to choose not only what to do with their songs, but also how to look and run to. Air business. Slowly, each person started to lose himself in his own world. Without anyone noticing, the togetherness that made them strong began to fade. John Lennon began to separate himself from the group. He became more interested in politics and personal growth, and he stopped giving the band his full attention. George Harrison felt a need to grow spiritually and began writing more of his own songs. Ringo Starr tried to keep up, but he often got lost in the crowd. That's when Paul McCartney started to do his best to keep everything together. Paul led the practice sessions and tried to get the band to move forward. He pushed for order and discipline because he wanted to keep the magic alive, but his power became too much for the others to handle. Especially George felt like he wasn't heard or valued. That friction grew as Paul focused more on leading than working with others. They no longer had the balance they used to have. Some people were taking a step back, but Paul was taking a step forward. George was getting better at writing songs, but he wasn't allowed as much room to grow as Lennon or McCartney. The work they did together as a team had turned into a fight for power. Different people had different thoughts on what the Beatles should be like. One new idea that isn't talked about much is how the group's move from the stage to the studio caused emotional distance. Without the thrill of live shows or the closeness that comes with traveling, they lost touch with each other. They stopped talking about their stories. They were just putting in their time. They felt less like brothers and more like co-workers when they did that. Even though the music was good, the mood changed. In the end, Paul's words, "We were no longer a band," said it all. We were just four guys coming from different places. That's exactly what was going on. They were at the top and couldn't go anywhere else together. Fame didn't just make them rich, it put them apart. The cracks were getting bigger over time. People blamed Yoko for the split for many years. The Beatles tried to hide the truth, though. What if she only told that? There was more than one storm. For many years, Yoko Ono was blamed for the breakup of the Beatles. Because she was always in the studio and was close to John Lennon, she was an easy target. Fans in the media saw her as the stranger who ruined the group's vibe. But that version of the story doesn't talk about what was going on in the band at the time. The truth is that Yoko didn't make things tense. She got there during it. The band had lost Lennon's love by the late 1960s, and he was looking for something different. Through art, ideas, and a close relationship, Yoko gave him a way to escape. She wasn't just a guest when she walked into the studio. She helped John come up with new ideas. The other people thought this was weird and awkward, but her being there wasn't the cause, it was just a sign. There was already a split in the Beatles. Yoko just moma biche. That stand out more. The cracks were already there when she walked into the room, but they got bigger. Lennon wasn't interested in the same things that George or Paul were. Before Yoko came along, their paths were already going in different directions. A key point that is often missed is that John fully allowed Yoko in. She didn't make them do this. He always wanted her to be with him, even when they were recording. This choice shook up the group's flow and broke an unsaid rule. It wasn't Yoko's fault, though. John was the one who chose to change things. Paul now says that they didn't know what to do about it. After a while, Paul said he saw how close they were and knew why John needed her close. It still hurt how the group worked together, but saying that Yoko killed the band is too simple. She didn't break anything. She walked into something that was already broken. As the band broke up, she was the easiest person to point the finger at. Yoko once said that being blamed for the breakup of the Beatles was like being blamed for murder when the victim was already dead. Paul now agrees with what was said. He knows it wasn't fair to blame Jules. Just one person because the group was already going in the wrong direction. It was much more than what people saw on the surface. It was a slow breakdown that wasn't her fault. Each member was already going in a different way besides Yoko. John liked unusual music and using music to heal himself. Paul liked well-made sounds and catchy tunes. George wanted more room to grow as a musician, but he felt like he was always being pushed to the side. It was late, and Ringo didn't know where he was. They were no longer a team. They were four separate people with four separate ideas. One new thing we can see is how John's move into avant-garde art with Yoko put Paul in survival mode. He worked hard to keep the band's character, while John tried to find a new way to express himself. Adding more stress made things worse. Paul and Yoko were not arguing. It was important to him to remember what the band had been like. That hole in his view made it impossible for him to heal. John's departure and Paul's quiet. John Lennon told the band in 1969 that he was done. Everyone was shocked when he said he was going. Paul was shocked, but he didn't say anything. Because of business, the group decided to be quiet. To protect the business, they had to work out contracts as a team. The band played in public for months after things got boring for a while. Everyone kept quiet because they knew the end was close. Paul made new songs and tried to keep things together because he still had hope. Things changed when his first record came out, though. The news spread the story that Paul had left the Beatles. A lot of people heard about it. Paul turned into the bad guy overnight. Fans said he wrecked the most well-known band. John had left, not him. Paul hadn't said anything because he wanted to keep his promise and keep the group's past safe. He got what he deserved for being quiet. He wanted to make things clear, but there was too much at stake. People would hate the band even more if they spoke out. They would lose deals and fans would be very angry. He didn't say anything. Some people thought he was the one who went away. He felt bad about it. When he and his wife Lynn got back to Scotland, they shut out the rest of the world. When he was alone with his thoughts, he felt very sad. He drank too much, stopped having faith in himself, and thought his job was about to end. He was having the worst time of his life. When things got hard, Cindy was there for him. She told him to write music again because he was good at it. Paul started to record new songs little by little. These rooms are where Wings began. That's how he came back from the edge. His quiet is even more important now that Paul has shared a new idea. He said it didn't bother him that people would blame him. He picked peace over telling the truth to protect what the band used to stand for. He picked up the hit instead of seeing the Beatles break up in front of everyone. No one saw what Paul did to protect the body. Band's name. He stopped telling the story, but there was a deeper reason. He wasn't weak. He picked to be quiet. He took care of things so there wouldn't be a fight when the Bugs broke up. He thought it was worth the pain. The Bugs didn't go off. They slowly fell apart. Now Paul tells them about the 4 hidden things that really drove them apart, why they really are. There were no more Bugs. The Beatles' split wasn't caused by a single event or person. It came apart slowly, formed by pressure to be creative, personal changes, and battles for power. Their relationship, which used to be strong and easy, started to weaken as they became more successful. Every person in the group had changed into a new person. In the end, they didn't break up. They were getting worse. There was a lot of creative strain. Lennon and McCartney used to write songs together without any problems, but things started to go off track. John liked it when people showed their true feelings. Paul liked organization and polish better. At the same time, George Harrison started writing songs that were just as powerful, but it was hard for people to hear them. Even though George wrote 2 of the band's best songs, Something and Here Comes the Sun, he still felt like he wasn't getting attention. Lennon and McCartney took up most of the room, which made George angry. Paul later admitted that they didn't trust or credit George enough. In the background, anger slowly grew because of this. It made the group less united from the inside. After that, Brian Epstein died. He was in charge of the band and helped them stay calm. There was no clear boss without him, and chaos broke out. It got harder to make choices. Arguments happened more often. It was hard for everyone to agree on anything important. This lack of direction turned into a full-on battle for power. Paul wanted Lee Eastman, Linda's dad, to lead the group. John, George, and Ringo instead backed Alan Klein. It got messy in court, which made them fight even more. In the end, Paul sued them not to win, but to keep the band's work from being messed up. Though fans were shocked, Paul thought it was the only way to protect the songs. He wasn't meaning to hurt them. He only wanted to decide what would happen to them. He looked cold when he did it, but it had to be done. It was about money, rights, and keeping years of work safe. Not only were their work lives confusing, but so were their emotional lives. John and Yoko were talking about new ideas and getting involved in politics. George turned inward and found peace in Eastern faith and playing music by himself. As he worked on producing and arranging, Paul kept trying to keep things going. Ringo often didn't know where he fit and felt stuck in the middle. All of them were changing and going their own ways. The Beatles were no longer just a group of boys. Both of them were adults with different views, plans, and goals. Their friendship had turned into a tense relationship at work. Not a single big fight, but a bunch of small ones that added up. The link that used to hold them together slowly broke down. It's important to note that their quiet and attempts to control their image only made things worse. They let stories grow by hiding the real problems. The band's fans thought everything was fine until it wasn't. The fall was more shocking than it needed to be because of the difference between how people saw them and how they really felt. Paul is not changing the past at age 83. He is getting better. And the facts he tells us now make us question everything we thought we knew. Getting along with the past. When Paul McCartney turns 83, old stories about him no longer bother him. He's not going to change the story. He's telling the truth. He told people for years that he broke up with the Beatles. He let the news story go because he thought saving the band's name was more important. That being said, he's ready to talk now that time has passed. Paul has thought about those last few years more than anyone knows. He looked at the details, made the same decisions over and over, and admitted when he was wrong. He feels both happy and sad when he thinks of each bandmate. He no longer sees things through the lens of anger or sadness, but through the lens of growth. What felt like betrayal before now feels like change. He thinks about Yoko and says that he admires how close she was to John. At the time, it felt like a bother. Now, though, he sees it as true love and kindness. He now knows why John took her everywhere. They worked together, and Paul looks up to that now. He also talks about John with a lot of love. Their fights were caused by being close, not by hate. Paul describes George as a smart, quiet person who needed more space. He now says that he didn't say enough about how smart, kind, and talented Ted George was. He feels terrible about it now. He no longer sees George as a junior member when he thinks about the past. There was always respect. It was just not always said. Paul shares a new thought. He never wanted to be known as the person who broke up the group, but he was also scared of seeing it happen in public. He didn't say anything because he hoped the storm would pass. Not at all. But now he can talk about things in an honest and fair way. He now thinks that the split wasn't about who was at fault. It had to do with time, change, and growing as a person. The Beatles did not break up. They changed over time and then went their different ways. Each band member had to find his own sound, which couldn't happen in the same group. It hurt to break up, but it's a normal part of life. Paul says he wouldn't change how it finished, but he would change how it was closed. People would listen to him more, believe what he said, and remember that they were still a family. Not always good or nice, but still linked. That is what he learned today. Thanks for seeing. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you liked this video.